He's at the helm of the world's most influential intergovernmental think tank. Under his leadership, the agency has become an even more active player on the global scene. Join us as Ray Chenggang speaks with Angel Gurria, Director General of the OECD, only on Biz Talk. Founded in 1961 in Paris, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development is an intergovernmental agency with 34 member countries. It serves as a global forum for economic policy, as well as a think tank, providing analysis and advice to members and non-members alike. Russia has long been in pursuit of membership in the OECD, and it's reaching ever closer to that goal.
Конечно, присоединение к ОЭСР – это новые стандарты, это дополнительный доступ к капиталу к нам в Россию. Это лучшие стандарты для бизнеса, поэтому мы в этом заинтересованы. И если у нас получится сделать это не в 2015, а в 2014, без каких-либо серьезных изменений для нашего законодательства, мы это будем делать.
Russia's economy relies heavily on the energy sector, which contributes around half of the country's fiscal budget, a fifth of its GDP growth, and two-thirds of its exports. The unbalanced Russian economic structure serves as a major growth boost during boom years, but risks triggering a crisis in less favorable ones. During the outbreak of the financial crisis in 2008, Russia's economy tumbled on a plunging US dollar.
The potential for the Russian economy is still very, very large. In fact, in many cases, it remains quite untapped. It faces a critical structural challenge to reduce its dependence on fossil fuels or oil-related revenues.
Though membership in the OECD seems attractive to many countries, some commentators say its decision-making is more based on the interests of the developed world. Underrepresentation of emerging market economies is reflected in the membership structure. Only 6 out of 34 OECD members are developing countries.
That some media hailed as the rich man's club.
Well, I think it's a misnomer, and just the fact that there's a Mexican running the OECD is a very good example of the fact that we're not the rich man's club. We are the club of best practices. This is the way Michelle Bachelet, the former president of Chile, used to characterize the OECD. Chile is, of course, now a member. Now, the Russians asked for accession, and since 2007, the members decided that 5 countries were on the accession path. 4 of them have already become full members, and now Russia is the 5th member. They're working hard. Maybe the target is conceivably maybe sometime around 2014 if things continue to move well. We're all working hard, the Russians and ourselves, and now with the G20 happening in Russia, and then the G8 happening in Russia, we're going to intensify the contacts to move the matter forward.
We're very curious about exactly how the talking process will be, because obviously it's always a very painful process, the multilateral talks, if someone wants to join the WTO. So if you wouldn't mind elaborating for us exactly how do you proceed with the negotiations about the accession?
I have to say that in the multilateral talks, this is not a process like the WTO. In the WTO, you have 200 members. Here you have 34 members, first of all. It's mostly about committees, and of course, eventually members have to decide. So this is not a very protracted process. Accession to the WTO lasted about 17 years for Russia. It's not going to take that long, anywhere that long with the case of
Fundamentally, what are the factors that ultimately determines if some country joins or not?
Countries have to take a look at that and see how their own rules and regulations and laws are consistent, and if they're not, then how we are going to have a process of rapprochement over time. But these are things that are not imposed. These are, in many of our instruments, are not even legally binding.
And as you said, if I ask you to pick up a few words to characterize the means of reaching consensus at the OECD, is the power of persuasion, consultation, consensus building, and instead of
I would say better policies for better lives, and that applies to each country in particular. It's different to each country, And what do we look for? Stronger economy, cleaner, both in the sense of environment, but also in the sense of transparency, integrity, anti-corruption, etc., and fairer in terms of a better distribution of income, better distribution of opportunities, less inequalities, and of course, the great tragedy of the OECD countries today, the question of unemployment, especially unemployment of the youth, long-term unemployment. These challenges are the ones that we are trying to help these countries to deal with.
At the end of 2012, a British tax evasion probe put into spotlight two multinational giants. And facing inquiries from UK lawmakers, Google and Starbucks both acknowledged their involvement in tax avoidance by basing their regional headquarters in low tax rate EU countries.
We set up in Ireland to serve the whole of the European Union. We chose Ireland for a range of reasons, one being it has a competitive rate of corporation tax.
Very unfortunate. We're not at all pleased about our financial performance here. It is fundamentally true, everything we're saying and everything we've said historically.
I am a low-tax conservative, but I'm not a companies should pay no tax conservative. Individuals and businesses must pay their fair share.
What happened in the UK are not individual cases. According to the US Congress, major global firms like Microsoft and Apple quietly dodge billions of dollars in taxes each year with potentially illegal schemes to move their profits to offshore tax havens, and the trend is gaining momentum. According to an OECD study, with the use of tax avoidance strategies, some multinational companies pay as little as 5% in corporate taxes, a rate that's only 1/6 the tax rate for smaller businesses. That gives the bigger players an unfair competitive advantage. The think tank says these practices, though technically legal, threaten the stability of the global tax system. The organization calls for a global solution to address the problem of existing rules, which were designed to protect global firms from double taxation, but instead have become a loophole for big companies to pay less taxes. The OECD warns such tax avoidance measures hurt investment, growth, and employment, leaving the public to shoulder the tax burden.
And taxing the rich has been making headline news around the world. Would you consider what's happening a long-term trend or only temporary?
I think this has been very controversial, and it has produced these rather bizarre episodes with some movie stars going into getting Russian passports, or somebody going to Belgium and getting some Belgian nationality. This is not the issue. These are newsworthy tidbits. But the question is really, you have to have a system which is progressive, but also that does not discourage effort, initiative, creativity, innovation, etc. That is, I would say, almost natural, logical, if you think about it. Who should pay more taxes? Well, the people who gain more income, okay? Now, the problem is that also, in many countries, the people who have the greatest revenue have also more shelters through their companies and through the services and this
tax
and that.
havens.
Yeah, and second, in many countries, there has been almost a political need to signify, to give a signal that in the time of crisis, the people with the highest revenues are going to make an extra contribution. The only question is that sometimes this has been taken to look like it's a social tension, saying that the rich against the poor and the poor against the rich and the government against the...
You're saying that if you are very obscenely rich, that you can still
pay very little
tax, or,
yes.
or zero at all.
Oh, yes. I mean, if you're a big multinational, you operate all over the world, you just transfer the profits to the places where you pay much less taxes. Now, this is something which we have created. It is legal to do that, but it's not right. And second, it is now becoming economically inconvenient because countries cannot comply with their mandates to provide the level of welfare to the people, because they don't have enough revenue.
In your own words, probably fighting tax havens and address those tax shelters will be a more effective way to increase tax revenue.
This is not necessarily related to the growth scenario, But here it's related to the capacity of countries to discharge their duties vis-à-vis the people. Second, there is something called base erosion and profit shifting. You have seen the headlines. Many multinationals don't pay taxes because they charge a lot for their profit, their sharing, and then they charge a lot for the brand, and then all the profits are put in very low taxation places. So in the end, we have the activity that does not generate any revenue for the taxman, and the treasuries need the revenue. These companies should pay taxes on the wealth and on the profits that they generate in the countries. We're looking at that. And this is a very big request by the G20, by the way.
After a period of relative peace following the last round of competitive currency devaluation of 2009, fears of a currency war are raised once more. Japan is again making waves on the currency front. In mid-January, Japan's central bank signaled its intention to launch an open-ended bond buying program to boost the country's economy, which has long been beleaguered by deflation. This attracted much criticism from numerous senior central bankers and finance ministers, warning of a fresh currency war from a fast weakening yen. In its most recent move, the Bank of Japan announced it will double its monetary base to 270 trillion yen, or $2.9 trillion by the end of 2014. In the meantime, with the U.S. Federal Reserve's QE3 and the ECB's liquidity injection programs in place, other countries are not just sitting idly by. Fearing weaker currencies and stronger local units hurting their exports, India, South Korea, Britain, and New Zealand moved or hinted to cut rates or devaluate their own currencies. All this have reinforced fears of a new currency war. Christine Lagarde, managing director of the International Monetary Fund, says these worries are unnecessary.
Zero currency war, okay? That's very simple. I'll have to say it again. I'll be happy to repeat it as often as necessary.
As the man at the helm of the OECD, what is Korea's view on this?
Aren't you worried about this current trend of a global QE?
Well, that's another matter. That has to do with monetary policy. We have run out of monetary policy room because interest rates are at zero or close to zero. Okay. So what are central banks doing now? They're buying debt. And they're buying debt for several purposes. They cannot bring the rate down below zero. There's a limited upside to this because once you do it once, you do it twice, then you get diminishing returns, okay? The central banks are the first ones to say, listen, I can only do so much. Governments, in the end, are the ones who have to take the medium and long-term structural decisions. I can do interest rates, I can deal with the currency, but I cannot deal with the fundamentals of the economies. Only the authorities and governments can do that.
But you're not worried that there are any near-term downsides of this global printing bills campaign?
I would say that the last thing that takes away my sleep these days is inflation. That is not in my concerns. It is one should always keep inflation under control. But today, the danger is that we could move into deflation. Like Japan has been flirting with deflation for more than 10 years. That's a scenario that we should, scare away. That is not the great problem that I see today. I see the opposite problem. We should go for growth.
Previously overstated. According to a new calculation based on a method developed by the OECD and the World Trade Organization, America's 2009 trade deficit with China was actually $45 billion less than previously reported. The new method tracks the entire supply chain and identifies the value created at each segment of the supply chain. Known as the value-added approach, this new calculation challenges the conventional wisdom, which includes the price of a finished product in the country's gross export figures, while ignoring the value-added contribution from other countries and regions further up on the supply chain. The OECD says this new method is aimed at presenting a truer picture of underlying trade flows in an age of made in the world. The agency also hopes it could alleviate some protectionist pressures, as in an interconnected world, raising barriers to imports could well mean hurting a country's own exporters and its competitiveness. Some analysts say, with the new method, the U.S. trade imbalance with China could be seen as an imbalance with the entire world.
We're also aware of a new calculating system when it comes to global trade that OECD jointly introduced with the WTO, which is very interesting because when you calculate the trade surplus between China and U.S., this new method will instantly bring down the total number.
The surplus of China with the U.S., if you calculate the trade in value-added terms, is reduced by 25%.
Exactly.
And also, the whole thing changes. For example, exports of cars from Germany, 30 or 40% are content is coming from elsewhere, not from Germany. Countries like UK, US, Germany, France, Italy, the more sophisticated producers, we normally say, oh, services are about 25%. Well, in value-added terms, services are about 50% of the content of what they export. Canada, Brazil, Australia, all so worried about China. Well, they think they trade with China, but their trade with China is smaller in value-added.
Right.
Those things are going back to the United States and to Europe. So they trade a lot more with Europe and the United States in value-added terms, except they're not aware of it. So what we are doing is creating a new map of trade in the world, which hopefully will lead us to greater support for an open trading system.
And do you think in the long run this new method will replace the old way of calculating the total amount?
At least we should have a very great awareness of the alternative numbers. For some time, we're going to be living with maybe the two. The ultimate idea would be to go for value-added accounting. It needs massive number crunching, national accounts and export-import tables, etc., matrices, because it also needs sector by sector, not only country by country.
Right.
But we're getting there. We put out the first batch of numbers with this. We're going to put out more in our Ministerial Council meeting in May, and we're going to report also to the G20 in St. Petersburg in September.
Has any American government official or trade official reacted to these modified numbers?
Oh, yes. We have very, I think, very enthusiastic support from China, certainly, but also from Europe, from the United States, from practically every member, not only of the OECD, but we're doing this also in hand in hand with WTO. Everybody, because this should not be resisted by anybody, because this is about knowledge. It's about knowing what is happening in the world. It's information. Then the information will allow you to take better policy decisions.
Born in May 1950 in Tampico, Mexico, Angel Correa was fond of learning foreign languages during his student years. He started his public servant career at the age of 18, when he worked as a translator for Mexico's Federal Electricity Commission. During that period, he developed a liking for economics, which motivated him to obtain a bachelor's degree in economics from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, an AMA degree in economics from Leeds University soon after. He served as Mexico's foreign minister from December 1994 to January 1998, before he became the country's Minister of Finance and Public Credit. Correa is credited as the architect of his country's economic stabilization. He took over the OECD in June of 2006. Under his leadership, the OECD has increased its participation on the global stage by expanding its membership pool and building stronger ties with major emerging economies.
The last time I had the privilege of meeting you was in Mexico during the G20 summit, and your colleague, Mr. Pascal Lamy, the outgoing WTO Director General, Secretary General, told me that he has never felt so lost when it comes to the world's future growth in his entire career, that he has never been so confused or felt so difficult to reach consensus among
when
world leaders.
Pascal tells you that he's seeking for answers, that's very meaningful, because Pascal is a man who normally has a few answers under his belt. But today and yesterday we were in some panels with Pascal, He's going to be presiding over this meeting in Bali. And now he's saying, let's go for trade facilitation. We calculate at the OECD that if the trade facilitation negotiations that are happening now in the WTO actually become successful, trading can reduce costs maybe by 11 or 14%, equivalent to bringing down tariffs by 11 or 14%. Fantastic result. It can really help the countries, mostly developing countries. Aid for trade, so that the aid is devoted to strengthening the infrastructure of the countries. Trade financing, border facilitation, question of customs clearance, etc. There are many, many things that can be done without necessarily finalizing the Doha round, which today seems very difficult. But still you can make a lot of progress.
So you are more optimistic than Pascal.
Well,
a lot more optimistic.
It's rather than, you know, I think it is Pascal that says, always asking about whether people are optimistic or pessimistic. He said, I'm activistic. And this is what we all should be, activistic. We should just continue. If we see something is worthwhile, if we see something that we know the numbers suggest to you that facilitation of trade do not hurt anybody, do not cost anybody, they just produce good results, why shouldn't we go for it, you know?
We were informed that you once said one of the biggest regrets in your career is you did not have a chance to run for the presidency of your home country, to serve your own country.
Well, this depends on circumstances. I have served my country all my life. In what capacity, in what category? Well, I think I perhaps would have liked to had an opportunity, a shot at being elected. It has not happened for different circumstances so far. But, you know, as I said, there are other ways to serve the country from other trenches. And right now the OECD is a wonderful place to be serving my country, but also serving China and many other countries in the world.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Always
Thank you very much.